Hey, what's going on, guys? This is Rob from Fantalytica here. This is actually our first video. So in this video, I'm going to get right to it. We recently put out a March pre-2021 NHL Draft list, top 31. You can see it right here on the screen. And so we used our platform to sort of supplement the data and the rankings that we have here. We've got our rank, the consolidated ranking from various scouting services. Craig Button's in there as well. So we've got the public's rankings, and then we've got ours as well. We've got the names of the players, and then the FS Plus. So FS Plus is part of our algorithmic metric that we've developed, and you can see above me here. This is our website. So what we're going to do in this this episode here is we're going to actually run through each of these players. I'm going to kind of give my opinion, why they got placed, where they got placed, and overall just try and give some information to you guys about why these guys are here, how they might be able to help you in fantasy, and where you may want to take some of these guys in the draft. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So I'm going to head to the portal real quick. And so here we're going to be able to see some historical stuff for a lot of these players. There's a couple that haven't played 10 games this year. So unfortunately we can't actually grab any of their historical data, just because the way our platform works is, you got to have 10 games for the current season in order to grab a player. So I'm going to show you real quickly here. So we're going to grab Phillip Tomasito here real quick. You're going to see that we've got a historical performance graph here. It's a line graph. It's got Fantascore and Fantascore Plus. This Fantascore Plus right here is actually right over here. That ranking has the FS Plus. So you can see, for example, Tomasito, he's been trending upwards. We've got our default fantasy scoring rules set up in my leagues here. So I'll show you right here. This is my league setup. So it's going to be 4 goals, 2 assists, plus minus is 1, hits, blocks 1. Majority of the other stats are 1, right? So some of these peripherals are important, not as important as goals. So we're going to head into the portal again. So Owen Power. Now, beginning of the year, Owen Power, it seemed as though he was easily the first overall predicted player, and ever since Michigan basically started, I think Benyar's kind of hopped up in there. And as far as the consolidated ranking, it's either him or Hughes, in my estimation. Maybe not up until this point, but throughout the year, I think Benyar was looking like potentially a first overall player, and he could be. But Owen Power, the thing I really like about him is he's kind of got a Tyler Myers vibe, but I think as far as maybe his IQ is a little bit more towards Myers, but when you watch him, there is a lot of Victor Hedman in him, and you're going to make that comparison just because of how tall he is and his reach overall. The way he plays the game is kind of lucid, just like Hedman plays. So you're going to get a really solid defenseman out of Power. I don't think he's going to be Tyler Myers. A lot of people like to make that comparison because, I mean, those are the 2 guys that are like 6'6" in the league, right? So there's only 2 guys that people, instantly go to compare. But I think Power is going to be a little bit better than Myers. Not going to be Hedman, but I think he's going to firmly situate himself in between those 2. So with Power in fantasy, especially, you're going to get a guy that has all the tools. He's got all the peripherals. He's going to end up playing on power play 1. He's going to be playing a lot of minutes. He's going to be playing, another guy that we can talk about too at some point down the road in another video is Moritz Seider, who, is going to be playing 26 minutes a night. And I could see Power easily taking that time on ice wherever he goes. So that's why we took him first, just because there's so many things that he does very well, and a little bit of teaching can go a long way with a guy like Power who wants to learn, is a very impressive player. He's physically gifted just because of how big he is and how well he skates. But there's a little bit of room for growth there. But overall, it would be very hard for me to pass on a guy like that. I mean, you're not going to find a guy like that rarely ever. So So Power is going to go 1 for us. He's got a fantasy score of 205. That's right now, as we speak, just above replacement level as a prospect. Replacement level in the default scoring settings that we have is 187, right? So anybody over 187, I'm very confident they'll play in the NHL. So Maddie Ben, another U of M guy. He's got a well-rounded stature to him, right? So the thing about him is he doesn't do anything super insane. He's got awesome IQ. He's a very intelligent player. He likes to play all around the ice. He's not a selfish player. He kind of reminds me of Nico Hischier. Hischier in many ways, right? On the ice, and just how the media is sort of describing this draft before it happens. Hischier was at the beginning of the year, when he got drafted, like at the beginning of the year in like September, he was maybe 10th or 12th. And then he slowly climbed up the rankings just because of how sound he plays on the ice. Ben is the same way. You're not going to get crazy amounts of peripherals from him, but I think a decent comparable for fantasy might be a guy like Dylan Larkin. Larkin, he's kind of a 1C, he's kind of not. On a good team, like a really good team, he's probably not the first line center, but in Detroit, obviously he has to be. I think Ben could probably follow Larkin's path a little bit. Larkin also played at U of M, ironically. So Ben he's a really good player. I think I would be very surprised if he did not go top 3. William Eklund. So I think William Eklund's a very interesting player because statistically he's on par or better than Alexander Holtz was in his draft year, right? And obviously we all know how Holtz plays on the ice. He's elusive, he can score, right? And so can Eklund. And Eklund's got some wheels. He keeps up the pace very well. He plays in a professional league, the SHL. So he's a very good player, and he kind of reminds me a little bit of Philip Forsberg, but maybe a little bit faster, a little bit smarter. And I mean, the thing about Forsberg is he didn't necessarily have such a prolific draft year stat line as Eklund. So, when it comes to projecting, right, Eklund's a very projectable player right now. He's at 275, so he's way up there, right? He's one of the best projected players that we have right now. So, and I've been rambling. I haven't even gotten to pull these guys up. So let's grab Eklund here. And we might have historical stuff from him. Let's see. Yeah, so we don't have any historicals, okay? But he's looking really good. Time on ice, 15 minutes. He's got 58 shots, 38 games. He could probably push that up a little bit. Peripheral wise, I'm not sure what you're going to get from him. He might block a little bit because he's flying around, and he probably is going to get some breakaways here and there every once in a while. Let's roll back a little bit here. Let's go to Ben. Let's see what we've got on him. So Maddie Ben, he hasn't exactly improved. He sort of had the same year in 18-19, 19-20. This year he's really found himself in the NCAA at U of M. So Ben is probably going to be on the come up. Let's go to Power real quick so we can give that to you guys. So Power had a pretty equivalent year last year. He played in the USHL on the Chicago Steel. Yeah, so he's someone definitely to look out for. He's only going to get better before he gets to the NHL, so keep an eye out for him. So Eklund's at 3. We ran through him. He's a great player. Wallstead, we don't have information on Wallstead, but Wallstead is breaking basically every record in the SHL ever for where he's at as an 18-year-old. The numbers he's putting up, I mean, he has like a 909 maybe in the SHL. I mean, that's for an 18-year-old, that is insane. So, I really wouldn't be surprised if whoever wins the lottery, if they potentially need a goalie really badly, I could see them pulling a Pittsburgh and grabbing, Wallstead at first, just like Fleury did. So, would not be surprised at all if Wallstead goes first. That being said, realistically, he's not going to go first. He's probably going to fall a little bit, just because there's some pretty nice players in the top 5. a lot of people are arguing who's going to go first overall, but it's realistically, you're not really arguing who the top 7 are, right? It's just a jumble between those 7 guys. And I think Wallstedt should be in there, and he's a very talented goalie. I think if there's ever any goalie that's guaranteed to be an NHL star, it's going to be him. So Luke Hughes. So unfortunately, Luke Hughes just got injured, but he is a very interesting player. Obviously, he's the youngest brother of the Hughes brothers. Let's see here. So this is his top graph. Last year, he had a pretty decent year. This year, he's having a better year. Unfortunately, he got injured. He hasn't exactly been blowing it out of the water, though. Obviously, his eye test is amazing. He's a great player. He's a little bit different of a player than Quinn and Jack. He plays just a little bit more different and not as... he's got great edges, but he doesn't have the best edges of those 3 brothers. But you're not going to go wrong with grabbing Luke Hughes at... I've got him at 5, but, from a consolidated standpoint, it's realistic that he does go first. I mean, his brother went first. Quinn Hughes looks like he could have easily gone first in retrospect here. So Luke Hughes is going to be a great player for you in fantasy and whatever team takes him in the NHL. So Brent Clark, he's interesting. I unfortunately don't have Clark in the Slovakian league. I don't have him in Fantalytica just yet, just because we don't carry the Slovakian league. We don't have a great pulse on the Slovakian Pro League, and we probably should after this, just because a lot of these young guys are going there. But he's had a really great year so far. The thing about Brent Clark, he does in a weird way remind me of a better offensive version of Owen Power. He's a very good skater. He's always got his head up. He's always trying to make plays. He's got a 200-foot game as a defender, which, you've got to at least have the defensive side locked down, and, he does. So I would be very surprised if Brent Clark slipped out of the top 5 in the real world. But personally, I think that it's very hard to argue that Clark would be above any of those 5 guys above him. All those 5 guys bring something pretty elite in some category that Clark, I just couldn't put my head around. So that's why I put Clark at 6, but he's a great player. He's going to be a great player. And I'm excited to watch him. So Dylan Gunther, another guy who I don't have him yet. He hasn't played. Let's see what I can get on him in the historicals. I can't type. So Gunther's, he's blown it out of the water. He was playing in the AJHL for a couple games, and then he moved over to the Oil Kings in the WHL. He's been lighting it up. As you can see right here, he's got 6 games, 14 points, 8 goals, right? And the WHL might, it's possible that the competitive, the compete level of the WHL is a little bit less, but you know what? That's okay. Gunther is a very elusive goal scorer. He reminds me a lot of Brock Besser, but maybe a little bit better of a skater. But Brock Besser, he's not a bad skater, right? He gets the job done. He's kind of like, Besser's a lot like DeBrincat. DeBrincat can't exactly skate amazing either, but it doesn't matter, because if you can score and put yourself in the right positions, there's going to be a lot of guys on your team that are going to be able to feed you the puck. So Gunther, luckily has an amazing shot. He's got great IQ in the offensive zone. He's going to be a pretty fun goal scorer. I think there's a lot of TJ Oshie in him as well. So, with that being said, he's someone definitely to look out for. So let's see if I can get here. Here we go. Yeah, so last year he had a 216 Fantascore plus. That's pretty solid for a D-1 player. He's at 0 right now because he hasn't hit the 10-game threshold. But he's a really good player. I would not be surprised at all if he got picked where we have him at 7. And he's a couple spots back for the public eye, right? So we're huge fans of Dylan Gunther over here. So Simon Edvinson, He's an interesting one. He's from Sweden. He's also one of those guys that, you know, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Victor Hedman, and not in like the exact way he plays, but I think he's just, when you watch him, you kind of see a little bit of that. That might just be me. But, you know, with the ice time that he's getting, as you can see in the Allsvenskan, he's only getting 13 minutes. That's not great. But, you know, in 5 points, 16 games, he's holding up in plus minus, doesn't have that many shots. He's probably not going to be an amazing fantasy player for you, but it's reasonable that he has a pretty decent NHL career. I see actually a lot of what's his name, the Swedish prospect that went with Ken Holland. I can't think of him right now. I know you guys are going to comment and shout out who it is. It'll come to me. He kind of reminds me of him as well. So yeah, Edvinson at 8. That's kind of spot on. I think we were a little not as hot on him as some of the public are, but, you know, to each their own. I think he brings some pretty good skill to the table. We'll have to see. I'm a big believer in stats should be the start of a conversation, and if you can follow up the stats with a solid eye test and have a true traditional scout watch him and tell you that there is a kit there, that's when you know that you might have a home run with a player. So Edvinson right now doesn't have the best stats. He's absolutely a victim of not getting enough playing time this year, and that's probably throwing him off a little bit as he plays in the J20 league. So with a fresh season next year without COVID, I could see Edvinson really pulling through and playing way better. And Philip Broberg is the guy that I think of now that I remember his name. So at number 9, we've got Kent Johnson. Okay. And so Kent Johnson, he is one of the other guys on U of M. And, you know, actually he's done very well for U of M. He's shooting at over 2 shots a game. He's getting on the board nightly. And, you know, he's kind of following the curve that we sort of caught with him last year. He's kind of right where he should be, it looks like. So it looks like he's probably going to be a top 6 player, right? It's because if your replacement level is 187 and 0 can be on this list, you know, that's like a 70-point gap, right? And so he's going to produce for you as a fantasy player. Statistically, he's just going to find a way, right? His eye test, he can be a little sloppy. He kind of has a little bit of a chip on the ice, chip on his shoulder. You know, the way he plays, he needs to be taught a little bit. I think there's going to be a little bit of a wake-up call when he does hit the NHL. But I mean, his kid is unreal. He's got an awesome like playmaking ability. He knows how to score. You know, he's really good. Unfortunately, he's a little bit overshadowed by some of the other guys in U of M, including, you know, the past first and second round players that were on that team, like Bartolo, Brisson. So, you know, when it comes to Kent Johnson, I think he should get a little bit more love. But I do not think that he should be first overall, like some people have said. And I also don't think he should be top 5. I think there's a little bit more for him to develop with before he can be a feasible NHL player and a good feasible NHL player. So I would wait a little bit on him. But if you can grab Kent Johnson at like 9 or 10, regardless of where he actually goes in the real NHL, I think that's a pretty good grab. He's absolutely going to, from a fantasy standpoint, he's going to be eye candy for another GM one day when he gets picked by, let's say, like, you know, a Canadian team picks him up in the draft. You know, someone in your fantasy league is going to want him when he's got 45, 50 points next year for U of M. So definitely worth a grab if you can get him at like a 9, 10, 11 spot. Definitely an interesting player for sure. So Cole Sillinger, huge fan of Cole Sillinger. He's an American, played in the OHL. He basically said, hey, I'm just going to move to the USHL. I don't want to wait for the OHL. And that was a good decision because, you know, let's see here. he's got a really awesome kid. He's a great player. Statistically, he's having a amazing year in the USHL. He's putting up all types of statistics, right? Like scoring a bunch of goals. He's feeding his team. He's not on a super great team, right? So Chicago Steel is a powerhouse this year. He's on Sioux Falls. He's playing really well. He shoots a crap ton, right? So, and he even gets a little bit of penalty minutes, right? He likes to shake it up a little bit. So he's going to be a solid peripheral player for you if you have penalties in your fantasy league. And I think he's going to be a great complementary Thomas Tatar utility, second line, can play first line if he needs kind of player. So I really do think the sky is the limit with Cole Sillinger. I think it was actually a very awesome move for him to move to the USHL, and I think he's going to represent the idea of the USHL being a criminally underrated league. Just because, the WHL is just now starting. It's March. OHL is still down. So some of these players had to go play elsewhere, right? They're going to play in Slovakia. They're going to play in the Allsvenskan. Going to play in the Hockey Etan, third league in Sweden, USHL, right? And the USHL is a super fun league to watch. There's numbers to back up that the USHL is a very relevant league. Around 40% of all NHL players right now came from the NCAA. And where'd they come from before they came to the NCAA? The BCHL, the USHL, the AJHL, and junior leagues in Europe, right? So the USHL is the huge feeder to the NCAA. NCAA is a huge feeder to the NHL league. So keep an eye on Sillinger. He's probably a little bit higher on our list than some others, but in my eyes, there's no doubt in my mind that he should be at 10. So Fabian Lyzelle, he's one of those guys that, let's see if I can find him on this list, right? Statistically, he's not having super great of a year at all. There are some outlets that had him ranked fairly high, and I guess I could maybe see why they could think that. Physically, he's a very fun skater to watch. He kind of reminds me a little bit of William Eklund. The thing about Lyzelle is I am not a super huge fan of the way he skates. I think he wastes a lot of energy. I think he actually gets a little bit too low. And so I think he does lose a little bit of top end speed, and he's a very fast player to begin with. So overall, I think Lyzelle is a very good player. I think he's going to be one of the better Swedish players of this draft to come out, but I don't think he's going to be a top 6 player. I think he's going to be more of like, maybe like a Matthias Janmark. He would be lucky to be compared to some of the really good Swedes playing right now. And, there's nothing really wrong with that. I don't exactly see his kit. I think statistically, watching some of the other players in the SHL play and seeing what they can do, you would hope that Lyzelle was able to keep up with them, but so far he hasn't. So let's just see if we can grab him, right? We'll grab him, and you'll see that there is reasonable cause that statistically he's having a little bit of trouble. In the J20 league and in the SHL, right? So 26 games. He's only got 2 goals and assist. Now, obviously, he's playing 7 minutes a night. That's not going to help. So when you think of goals per 60, assists per 60, SOGs per 60, his numbers don't exactly replicate or reflect how he's actually doing. I think, if he's playing Eklund minutes, he's probably going to have closer to 6 goals, 6 assists, so he's going to have like 12 points in 26 games. That's a little bit more reasonable if he's playing regular minutes. But, I wouldn't be surprised if he falls back a little bit. And we've got him 2 spots behind the consolidated rankings, which I probably could have put him lower, but I didn't because I know that there's a lot of people that really like him, a lot of guys who are very respectable in this industry, and he does have a lot of room to grow. He's a very, very intelligent player, so I didn't put him down too low. I probably could have. Now, Coronado. Matthew Coronado is probably my favorite player of this draft. And I say that because you watch him and you wonder why he is rated so low by some outlets, right? I mean, it's after 41 games this year, it has taken the public so dang long for him to even get on the top 32 list, right? So you can see right here, his consolidated rankings, he's at 32. I don't know why. He's having an awesome year. Obviously, he's on the steal, but you could argue that Coronado is actually the engine of this team and not Sean Farrell, right? Sean Farrell got drafted last year, 4th round, Montreal Canadiens. Great player in his own right? But the thing about Coronado is, he's growing and he's playing in a very competitive USHL. The USHL has probably got higher compete level this year than any other year, just because there's other teams in other leagues that have to not play and lose some players to this league. So he's had a pretty nice jump, but you know what? For his D-1 year, he did very well, right? So Fantascore plus 161. He's looking very, very solid. 41 games, he's shooting 3.5 times a night. He's got awesome peripherals. He's always trying to work on in the D end. He tries to be as responsible as he can. He can perform. He's potting goals left and right, and he's feeding his teammates left and right as well. So overall, he's a slam dunk pick for fantasy. If you can get him in the 10 through 20 range, that's a solid pick. I would be very happy to see anybody respond to my tweets about Coronado when I talk to him about him more during the draft. If they pick him up, they're going to be very happy in 2 years that they have him. So he kind of reminds me of, dare I say it, a slower, lesser degree Nathan MacKinnon. I really do think that. The way he plays, he's just slower than MacKinnon. I mean, obviously MacKinnon flies. So I watch him and I just see someone who could seriously become a very solid NHL player. I could see first line potential for this guy. I could be wrong, but the statistics back it up, I think, a little bit. And, I watch him and there's just something that I gravitate towards when I watch him. Okay, so Oscar Oleson. So I'll be honest, I don't know much about Oscar Oleson. He plays in Sweden. I think statistically he had one of the better setups of these top 32. And the way I did these rankings, so here we go. So he's played in both the J20 and the Allsvenskan, he's produced fairly well. 27 points, 16 games, 85 shots in 16 games. That's always great to see. Allsvenskan, he's holding his own. So I saw his numbers and I thought, well, I haven't seen much of him, but there's a lot with 10 minutes played per game, in the Allsvenskan, which is, a much more competitive league this year, just because of, like I've said, and like everybody knows, I mean, COVID's screwing all the leagues up. So, Oleson is probably going to be a very good player in the NHL. I could see him being better than Lyzelle. I could actually see Oleson getting picked above Lyzelle. So I'm not going to dive in and pretend that I know anything about Oleson because I haven't watched a game of his. But statistically, he looks great. So take that with a grain of salt. Mason Mactavish. I really like Mason's game. He's a very responsible player. He's got some flair to him. Obviously he's from the OHL. I believe he's one of those guys that has waited to play, which unfortunately might hurt his draft stock a little bit. But I've got a lot of faith in those OHL players, just because there's actually not that many of them that could be in the first round, even before COVID really hit. So I really like Mason's game a little bit more than Francesco Pinelli. I know that some outlets are extremely high in Pinelli, EP Ringside being one of them. But I think Mactavish kind of reminds me a little bit of McMichael, actually, ironically, the two mix. But I like Mactavish a lot. And, while you don't statistically have a lot to work with, sample size this year, if he falls, around to 20, you just have to pick him up, right? I mean, he's going to be a year behind, more or less, but you know what? He's just going to wait another year to play, right? He's not going to maybe get that first crack at an NHL game compared to some of these guys above him, but you know what? That doesn't matter, because 1 year is 1 year. If he needs one more year to develop, you're going to give it to him. So Pinelli, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Riley Damiani, actually, who's killing it in the AHL. Pinelli plays a very swift game. There's really not that much to say that's bad. He's a very cerebral player, right? Don't have numbers on him this year, but he was looking like potentially the best OHL player to come out of the draft at the beginning of the year, assuming that the OHL was going to come and play. They didn't. You know what, Pinelli, I'm a big fan of his. I do like Mactavish more, but you know what, Pinelli those two guys are like going to be the two OHL studs that come out of that league, in my opinion. So either of those guys are pretty good picks in the mid 15s range. They might fall, and if they fall out of the first round, which is not the craziest thing to think of, right? Like teams are going to be under hot water. Scouting as it is already difficult because they're going to have to scramble to keep up with the next class, right? Because for obvious reasons, right? I mean, there's this class hasn't played that much overall. Like total minutes, this class is way behind, just because the OHL is a huge feeder league to the NHL. So if Pinelli and McTavish fall, it's not the end of the world. Just trade up, get them at 26 and 27. And you know what? A lot of the fantasy guys that you're going to be drafting with, they're probably going to pass on both of them, and you should probably scoop them up if you can get a pretty good value pick there. But don't break your neck and get them at 11 and 12, because there's just a couple of other guys that are a little bit better. Okay, so Ratu and Carson Lambos. So I'm going to do these guys together because they kind of have the same stigma. One's a forward, one's a defender. Ratu was potentially a top 5 pick, a year ago, 2 years ago. Carson Lambos, honestly, he's really not a bad player at all. I mean, I think the problem with both of those guys is first off, Ratu, he's struggled in the Liga for sure. So we're going to pull up his stats here real quick. And I think it's just, he needs to bulk up. I think he needs to mature a little bit more. I think he needs some confidence. I think he needs a little bit more strength. Because right now it's just not cutting it. And even with 11 minutes played per game, I mean, he could probably be doing a little bit better. I think with how much of the word prodigy was going around of Ratu, when he was 16, even 15, right? So I think that's probably why he's falling, and that's also a lot of the reason why I put him a lot lower, because statistically there's nothing that tells me he's a prodigy by any mean, right? So yeah, I mean, you could, it's funny, you can see Ratu, same points and everything. Not a bad player, but you know what? I would personally pass on him. I think, every year there's got to be a couple of busts, right? And I'm not going to call him a bust, but if I had to vote, it would have to be him right now, right? I mean, I don't think he's going to bust at all, but it might be tough for him to figure it out, at least for the rest of the year. And then Lambos, I think the fact that people expected him to be so great at everything, and since he's not great at every single thing, they moved him out of the top 5, and it's not that big of a deal. He's still a very solid defender. I think he does a lot of things extremely well. He's got great vision. He in a weird way, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Matt Dumba. I just watch him, and the first player that comes to mind, is going to be Matt Dumba. I like his game a lot. He doesn't do anything amazing. There's nothing really elite, but he's going to be a great second line defender, right? I could see him essentially or eventually developing into a guy maybe like Jeff Petrie, right? Jeff Petrie's, I mean, obviously this year he's having an insane year, but historically, you know, Petrie was always a very, very solid second line D, a complimentary first line defender who played with someone who would drive the play, and Petrie would kind of be like that two-way guy. Lambos has a lot of those qualities that Petrie has. So, I mean, that's really not a bad comparison. Statistically, you know, he could be doing a little bit better, but honestly, he could be doing a lot worse, right? Brendan Othman, honestly, he's one of those guys that I watched some clip of his last season, and there's definitely a lot of maturing that he has to do. He's not in the same bracket as Mactavish and Pinelli, but I think Othman, if there's going to be a guy that falls out of the first round, I really think it could be him, just because, you know, he played this year in the second tier Switzerland league, right? He's got a 0.5 point per game there, which is not bad at all. But you know, it's weird because in that second tier league, I mean, there's the skill exponentially drops off when you go from that first tier league in the Swiss league to the second tier league. There's a huge discrepancy in skill. I would have probably put him higher on this board if he went a point per game there. But because he's in that second tier league, which, you know, I've ran a lot of numbers on league equivalencies and what type of leagues should produce what type of players, and there's a huge drop off. So, you know, it's great that he got to play this year at all, right? I mean, a lot of these OHL guys couldn't find homes and they just got stuck in the mud. But, you know, Othman's, try and grab some clips of his online, watch him, see for yourself, right? Yeah, maybe another guy that I could pass on if he in real life goes a little earlier than I think. You know, if he goes to 29, 30, I'm going to scoop him up. But, you know, if he goes where I think he will go, which is around 18, I probably wouldn't pick him up. Zachary Leroy. So I watch him, and so first off, I feel like his name, you know, funny enough, I mean, for the younger guys that might play NHL 21 a little bit too much, he's always in that top 7 in that draft year, and I think so people instantly think, you know, if they don't do super deep dives on this guy, they're just going to think that he's just a very good player who's criminally underrated, just like Joe Veleno was, right? And Joe Veleno fell, and I think Leroy, he might have a little bit of trouble staying in the first round. And I say this because, you know, he's got great vision, right? He can keep with the game. He makes his line mates better. There's nothing glaringly obvious about his game that tells me he's got the it factor. I think you watch him and, you know, maybe sometimes he's got a little bit of trouble skating. I think to me there's a lot of Tyler Bertuzzi in him, but not as cerebral, right? Bertuzzi has made a great living in the NHL because his IQ is off the charts. I mean, he's probably the smartest Red Wing hockey player on that team. I don't think I can say the same for Leroy. But, you know, I still think there's a kit there. I still think if he can work a little bit on his skating, maybe bulk up a little bit, I think there is definitely something there that could bring in, you know, for an NHL team that drafts him. I think he could easily become a second line player. He just has to really work for it. And sometimes that doesn't work for guys, right? So I think mentally he's got a really good eye for the puck. But he's down where he should be for a reason in my eyes. I'm going to pull up the statistics for him real quick. So 26, 28 games, right? So he's producing well. I'm gonna fix this. I'll move on to the next guy while I'm talking about, or while I'm pulling up Leroy. So Daniel Chayka, he's a really fun guy to watch. You know, I have him higher up on the board. I don't know exactly why he's so low, but you know, Chayka, I'm just gonna go to Chayka. I mean, Leroy is going to be above replacement when he becomes in the NHL. So let's run to Daniel Chayka. Gotta give it a sec. Okay. So Chayka's had a typical KHL year, right? There's when a player goes to the KHL, our algorithms always find a way to see that there's a lot of variance, right? Because, you know, the KHL is very rigorous when they play players. It's tough for a young guy to get in there and play, regardless of how good they really are and where they could be as a player. I think selfishly they do that because they want the player to be there longer than realistic, right? So a perfect example is Podkolzin. He, in my estimation, he was screwed with playing time so that he could actually play and maybe re-sign again, which is so weird because you would think that the player would literally hate himself for playing there. But anyways, Daniel Chayka, really fun player to watch. He's a defenseman. He's 18. He definitely gives me Alexander Romanov vibes as far as like projection and how he's so far played in the KHL. I mean, it's really hard to be an 18-year-old in the KHL, let alone a defender, right? There's already half as many spots available in the KHL for a defenseman compared to a forward. So he's on a great organization. He's on CSKA Moskva. He's going to be there a while, but he's going to come to the NHL, and I think whatever team drafts him, that fan base is going to love him. Chaz Lucius. So there's been a lot of Twitter talk about Chaz lately, and I completely get it. He's on a pretty stacked USDP team. I feel like every single highlight I've ever seen of his, he scores within 5 feet of the net, which is a very good thing. But at the same time, is not a good thing. I think he lacks a little bit of dynamic play in his game. I think there's not as much play driving as I'd like to see out of him. I also think that his top end speed, overall quickness, needs to improve heavily for him to actually be a proficient NHL player. There's a little bit of Matt Boldy in him, slower, not as cerebral. He could be a little bit more aggressive, right, with the puck, and make some plays that he might be overextending on, but I think he has to take that risk, and I think he has to learn from it. And so I think he plays a little bit safe. I think he relies heavily on his teammates, and I don't see much play driving out of him. That's why I have him quite low compared to, the consolidated rankings. So he's at 21 for me. He's in 14 on an average, and I've seen him as high as 7, right? So I personally don't think he is a top 10 player. Some people would disagree, but I watch Chaz, and there's a lot to like about him, right? But he's got to get in the gym. There's a lot more to develop with him. But he could be an interesting player to grab in fantasy because the role that he plays in the NHL means he's probably going to have to use his body a little bit more. So peripherally, I think there could be some potential for hitting and blocking. Simon Robertson. So Simon Robertson, I really like him. He's had a pretty okay year in the SHL. He's had a little bit rougher of a go, but draft year, Swedish defensemen who play in the SHL. If you can get 22 games out of a player, you're going to be very well off, right? The coaching staff trusts him enough to even play 22 games. That's 22 more games than a 28-year-old who's on their team, who's a scratch. And then he's on Skellefteå, who's pretty solid team this year. I mean, they have Berggren, right? So, they want to win, right, this year. And so he's played 22 games. That's very impressive. 15 games, 20 points, J20. He likes to shoot the puck. He likes to get it through the net. Did I say he was a defenseman? He's not a defenseman. I don't know if I had said that or not. Very good player. I like him a lot. I actually like him more than I do Lyzelle. So take that for what it's worth. I think he's right where he should be. I think he's going to be picked right around where Simon Holmstrom got picked by the Islanders. I think it was like 2 years ago or 1 year ago. Yeah. Okay, Corson Coolman's. Everyone's going to think that he's just like Cale Makar because he plays in the AJHL and he puts up points. He doesn't play exactly like Cale Makar. I think he needs to. I think there's a lot of raw potential with this guy. I think I put him where he's at because, like I said, there's some raw talent there. But if he can't reel it in and gain control of the amount of energy that he uses on a shift by shift basis, he's going to get eaten up in the NHL. I think that he makes the perfect amount of risky plays. He's just a really fun player to watch, honestly. I mean, he's going to be a pretty decent player in the NHL. I think he's going to make it. It depends how he translates into the pro ranks one day. But as far as Coolman's goes, I think he's probably at best a third line PK player. I just don't think I can see him playing on a power play. I mean, unless he's on a team that literally has no defensive prospects and ends up rebuilding later on. I mean, then he'll just be thrown into that position, but I just don't know if I can see him handling it. We'll see. Nikita Chiberkov. So he, in my estimation, he's actually, let's pull him up here. I really like Chiberkov. He's sorry, I'm waiting to pull this up. Yeah, so he's played everywhere. But you know what? He doesn't get rattled by the whole KHL way of playing. You know, you're playing everywhere, right? You're going to play, if you're good enough, you're going to get KHL games, you're going to get VHL games, you're going to get MHL games, right? He's done okay in all of them, right? The VHL, he's put up 8 points in 20 games. That's really not bad. The MHL, he's shooting a crap ton. He's on 1946 St. Petersburg. Could be a little bit difficult to get awesome playing time there. So yeah, I mean 15 minutes. But I think he's going to develop, and I think there could be there's a small chance that he might be able to be a first line player one day. The way I watch, he's just a really awesome player to watch. I would consider picking him up in this range. He probably doesn't get past 20, but you know, you'd be surprised, right? All right. So my second favorite player in this draft is Sean Barrens. So Sean Barrens, he plays in the U.S. developmental program. As you can see, he puts up gaudy numbers in my estimation, right? 34 games, 29 points. That's not too far off from Luke Hughes, but obviously points isn't the end all be all, right? So the thing I like about Barrens so much is he's an extremely patient player. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Victor Soderstrom in the fact that he is a patient, methodical player. Barrens is a sneaky, solid player on this team. And I think if there's anybody that's going to actually jump up quite a bit, it could be Barrens. There is a lot of first line offensive defenseman potential with this kid. He's going to need a solid defender, partner that can stay back for him and maybe correct some of the risks that he takes. But I think with Barrens, it's at the very minimum, I think he ends up being a okay second line defender, but I think his potential is literally going to be first line defender, first power play, runs it, right? So I like Barrens. If you've got a late pick and you don't like what you see left, he might be worth a good grab. Scott Morrow. So I don't have Scott Morrow. Plays for Shattuck St. Mary's. He's a very good player as well. I think just because of the nature of COVID and how many players are playing in different places, I think maybe Morrow could have benefited a little bit more from playing away from Shattuck. I think Shattuck 10 years ago was a fantastic place to play hockey. I think it still is pretty good, but I think there's greener pastures now. So great player, awesome skater, right? He could be a pretty good NHL player, but I can't put him past 25. I just can't. Okay, so Ayrton Martino. I definitely botched his first name. So I watched Martino, and he is such a fun player to watch. He plays in the USHL. I don't know where he's from, but the thing I love about Martino is he just flies. He is such a great skater. He's got pretty good hands as well. He's seriously going to be a fun player to watch in the NHL. I honestly see a perfect copy of Andreas Athanasiou. I think maybe a little bit more intelligent than Athanasiou. I think Athanasiou makes a lot of risk, or takes a lot of risk. I think Martino is a little bit better with that. And he has had a fantastic year at Omaha. So he's going to go to Clarkston in the NCAA. He'll probably be a one and done. Love this kid. He should be in the first round for sure. I think Scouching also really likes his game as well, which is cool. He needs to get a lot of love for sure. Isaac Rosen. The thing about Rosen is, like, I watch him and there's a lot of things that he needs to optimize his game so much. And I think he's a very raw player. Yeah, to be honest, I didn't even realize that he had 5 minutes a game in the SHL. I think that's reasonable. He needs to get a lot better, but he needs to get faster. I think he needs to be a little bit more of a go-getter. I watch him and feel like he likes to coast a little bit, but he reminds me of like Phillip Hollander. I think he's on Pittsburgh now. I think he got traded. Or no, he's in Toronto. He was with Pittsburgh. He reminds me a little bit of him, right? His skating is pretty okay. Hollander had a better statistical year, his draft year, than Rosen. So I think Rosen has quite an uphill battle. I could see him falling out of the first round, but I had to keep him in there just because consolidated wise, I mean, he's at 20. A lot of guys do like him. I just kept him at 28 just because he probably should be in the first round, but I could definitely see him falling out. Savozil, haven't seen a game of his. I wasn't going to put him at 15 if I didn't think he was at 15. I realistically just don't know enough about him to put anything on paper that would suggest that he'd be a mid-round first round player. Okay, Matthew Smoskovich. I watch him. There's a little bit of Matt Boldy in him for sure. I think he's playing on a very good team. I think it's very easy to come get points if you play in the top six on the steal. I think he is a very good player in his own right, but I think he needs to have a really good line in order to play. I think I don't know who he plays with regularly, but the fact that he is on the steal, it's not going to be that hard to put up a lot of points. I think he could do a little bit better job of putting pucks on net. Preferably, I think he's going to be a good player. He's going to hit. He's going to block. So I could easily see him being, one of those net front guys on a power play in the NHL. I think he's right where he should be. I do think he should be in the first round, but I really don't. I'm not super confident that he stays in there. When you get to like 28, 29, 30, there's usually a couple of guys that get picked up from the second round into the first round that move up on public boards. But, you know, Sam, he's going to be a good player. I do like him a little bit. Okay, last two guys. So Zachary Bolduc, I was wavering between putting him up here or not. And, you know, statistically, he is a very good player. I think he puts up good numbers. I mean, he's going to be a pretty good forward wherever he goes. Plays on Rimouski. You know, I think he played with a little bit with Lafreniere last year. He's right around replacement level, but you know, in the QM JHL, it's not that great, to be honest. I mean, if you're only a point per game in the QM JHL, I think you need to do a little bit better job. But what Bolduc does so well is I think he just shoots the puck, man. I mean, he's got 120 shots, 26 games, and he's only scored 10 goals. So I think there's a little bit better shooting percentage there for him, and I think he'll get there. And as long as he has the confidence, I think he's going to be a pretty decent like third line player for sure. Okay, and the last guy on our list, Pastujov. So he was the I think at the time that I wrote this, he was the second best Fantalytica Fantascore player that I had. So I'm going to pull him up. Plays on the USDP. He needs to improve his skating a little bit. I think might get roughed up a little too much in the NHL. I'd like to see how he does in the NCAA. But he's lighting up the USHL, right? I mean, this is pretty typical for a guy who is in a position to play more ice time or get on the ice more. You know, he's a good player. I mean, statistically, if you only looked at stats, he would be in the top 10. If you watch him, he probably wouldn't even be in the top 40. So I kind of threw him in the middle there. I said, you know what, he might get plucked at the end of the first. I think if he makes to the second, I think some teams might be surprised. And this is the end of the video, guys. I really appreciate you watching. Leave a comment. Let me know who you disagree with, where you think someone should go higher or lower, if my explanation was wrong, or you think, you know, your opinion differs, or you think player does better than how I explained how they do. Be sure to check out Fantalytica if you liked the Fantascore Plus numbers that you see. And obviously you can see, you know, during the video you saw that I was browsing through a big table of players, getting some time on ice, and some other metrics that you might not be able to see in one place. Check it out, and, you know, tweet at us if you have a question. We'd be happy to help or show you a player or two on Twitter if you had any questions. So I really appreciate you guys watching this, and thanks.